Hey everyone, and welcome back to Timeless. This video is going to be quite different. I'm not going to be bringing any gameplay. I'm also not going to be bringing a script or an edited tutorial. Instead, I kind of just want to talk about the energy cards and what exactly makes cards like this so good, and why we see these Modern Horizons energy cards and their close friends like Bowmasters dominating the fair meta, being slotted into very good decks in multiple formats, and why exactly they always seem to go to the top, and why I always find myself coming back to them. Had this idea for a video for a while, so this is going to just be a bit of a yap session where I talk, maybe treat this video like a podcast, and I'm just going to get yapping about why these cards are good, and as a competitive player, why there's no other good alternatives to them. So the main reason is that these cards are always tempo positive, or at least tempo neutral when you play them. So let's talk about tempo and quickly define what I call tempo. There's really two kinds. The first is mana parity tempo. For example, a tempo positive could play for you could be your opponent taps out, spends 4 mana on the One Ring, you spend 2 mana counterspelling it. So that was your opponent's whole turn's worth of mana and only 2 of your mana that you held up. That's a tempo positive play for you. Your opponent plays a 5-drop and then you source Plowshares for it. Tempo positive play as well. And it could also be tempo negative. If you play the 5-drop and gets hit by Swords to Plowshares and that thing didn't have an ETB or anything, that's a very tempo negative play for you. And that's something that you should try to avoid. And the second kind of tempo is board state tempo. Uh, just a small incremental change in the board state that happens immediately. And sometimes it's a short term benefit, sometimes it's something that can snowball into longer term benefits. So let's start by evaluating some of these cards in the context of that. Like, this is a Swords to Plowshares format. I love Timeless. It's my favorite format. It's what I've been playing, but every format has sufficient 1 mana removal spells. When you play a Guide of Souls, or a Ragavan. This is a card that just has to be answered the turn that it comes down. Otherwise, it just starts snowballing. Realistically, with these cards, you doesn't have to be answered the millisecond it comes down. It could be a whole turn cycle. As long as it gets answered before we get to our attack step on our next turn, it's fine. But really, these cards demand a removal spell. And in Timeless and literally every other format, even Swords to Plowshare formats or formats with Solitude, this is going to be mana neutral in the case of Swords to Plowshares, and in the case of somebody playing a Solitude, it's going to be card advantage positive for the Ragavan player, which is wild. So these cards demand instant responses, and the response always costs the same 1 mana that you put into the card. Meaning, if you're on the play and you go turn 1 Ragavan, go, and then your opponent goes land drop, Swords to Plowshares, hit your Ragavan, you didn't lose anything. The game just restarts with everybody having 2 mana on their first turn instead of 1 mana and having 6 cards in hand instead of 7. The downside to playing these cards is practically non existent because they just are lightning rods for removal. Now, I'm being hyperbolic when saying there's no downsides. Ragavan is a card that does need to do combat damage to the opponent, so it can easily be blocked, for example. And also with Guide of Souls, there could be something that prevents life gain or prevents energy, but that's a lot more niche than just blocking Ragavan in combat. These two cards have really proved to be kind of crazy lately in terms of that mana parity. And the other thing I mentioned, Solitude, is that if your opponent can't spend that mana early, they have to 2-for-1 themselves. And in Timeless, you see control decks like having to evoke either Subtlety or Solitude to deal with this card. So that's like an immediate plus in favor of the energy deck on turn one, even though they didn't get to play their 1-drop. The control deck is now playing for behind, and it's going to be stuck behind. Let's look at Amped Raptor, which is even worse. So this card is a guaranteed 2-for-1. In a Lurrus deck like this, it cannot miss. It will only miss if there's a card like Vexing Bauble in play, which people aren't going to sideboard in against you, or if there's like a Sun Cleanser on the battlefield, which the Swords to Plowshares format, Swords to Plowshares deck, that Sun Cleanser is not going to stay on the battlefield. This Raptor is always a 2-for-1. It is at minimum. You could view it as 2 mana, 2/1 for a strike draw card. That by itself is a great rate, right? We've seen variations of like 1 mana 1/1 draw card that have been playable in standard and other formats. Like there's a couple white variants of that card. One just got spoiled in Foundations that are strong playables in standard. There's classic cards like Baleful Strix, Icefang Quaddle. Those last two I named have had their place in the sun, like in formats in the past, not super playable today. Like nobody's really sleeving up Strix and Quaddle in Legacy anymore. But that is at least a defensible idea. Here, this is something with 2 power instead of one, with first strike, so it goes into your aggro deck. It guarantees you another hit. Not only that, it's going to essentially give you 3 mana. So we talked a little bit about mana tempo. Sure, a vanilla 2-1 is not really worth 2 mana. 2-1 first strike's better than a vanilla 2-1, sure, but it's not worth 2 mana in a constructed format when you can have a Ragavan as a 2-1 for 1 mana. This card's obscene. But this is getting you another hit out of your deck. So even if you evaluate Amped Raptor to only be worth 1 mana, the front side of it, you are still guaranteed to get 2 mana worth of shit out of your deck. You are guaranteed to hit a Ragavan, Guide of Souls, etc., which are 1 mana. You're guaranteed to hit your good removal spells, 1 mana. So again, you got 2 mana's worth of stuff. If you hit Raptor with Raptor, we just established it's worth 1 mana, so that's still 2 mana. But then if you high roll and you hit a 2-drop, then you just generated mana. And the Amped Raptor nonsense doesn't stop there because people are playing either hub sometimes in their Amped Raptor decks. I don't like it in the 3-color decks, so I don't have it here, but you can hit the 3-drop for 3 off of Amped Raptor. I've hit the 1 ring off of Amped Raptor. I've hit the 1 ring off of Amped Raptor, and I cast it for free, and I've gotten protection for a turn for 2 mana. And this thing cannot be efficiently answered by removal. So which this takes us to our next category of cards, the 2-drops. So the 1-drops, they could get traded 1-for-1 with the removal. And that essentially just resets the board state back to what it was when the game started. We just established that. So that's why when this deck's on the play, even if your opponent has the removal spell, you essentially just get to start the game over on the play. These cards are removal immune. So they are tempo positive against removal, not necessarily in a mana sense, because of course you can Swords to Plowshares the Ajani, but they're tempo positive in a board state sense. You Swords to Plowshares the Ajani, it leaves behind a 2-1. Are you happy to spend 2 mana on a 2-1? No. That's not going to cut it in timeless modern legacy. But it was free. You traded 1 card for 1 card, you got your 2-1. Same with the Amped Raptor. If your opponent points the removal spell at Amped Raptor, you get the free spell. If they point the removal spell at what Amped Raptor cast, you got a free Amped Raptor in terms of card advantage. Bowmasters is a very egregious example of this because it is a removal spell itself. You flash in Bowmasters, kill enemy Ragavan. Your Bowmaster eats a removal spell, and you still have an Orc army. Oh man, and then we have a timeless specific thing, but our cute little alchemy friend, Juggernaut Peddler. I'm in love with this card. If you haven't seen much timeless or much of my channel before, this is one of my favorite alchemy cards. It's a 2 mana discard creature, but what's really sweet is it exiles the card from your opponent's hand, almost like a 2 mana Thought Knot Seer, and it gives them an absolute junk card in its place. And this is another good example of like, okay, I get to look at my opponent's hand. Are you going to removal spell this Juggernaut Peddler? You don't want to. It's just a 2/2. And I already did the thing I wanted. What I really wanted to do was look at your hand to give you a Juggernaut. Not to mention that like the power level of these cards when they do get unanswered goes through the absolute gosh darn roof. So a Johnny plus Goblin Bombardment, very established busted play pattern. This enables this fair creature deck just about turning creatures sideways to get turn 4 kills, which is that's crazy fast. That's like prowess nut draw without blockers territory. Though I think in formats with enough free spells, prowess nut draw can kill on like turn 3, maybe even 2 with infect. I don't know, dude. I don't play modern. I haven't played modern in years. I just play timeless nowadays. Then Ragavan as well. Ocelot Pride, Guide of Souls. These are all cards that can have snowbally aspects to them when they're not answered immediately on the spot, which is what prompts the pressure on the other deck to actually answer them on the spot. What happens when you're constantly answering these creatures on the spot, you're not developing your own board state. So imagine turn 1, like the Ragavan comes out, you answer it, Ragavan dies. Turn 2, the Ajani comes out. You answer it, opponent gets to keep a 2/1. The next turn, a Guide of Souls and like another Amp Trapper hits the battlefield. Even if you like keep answering all of them, spending like an equal amount of mana that your opponent spent, I'm just accruing random value from like the dorky 2/1s and the little Bowmaster tokens and the pings and the life I've gained. Oh, and the energy that I've gained that I could just use later. And this deck just seems to always pull ahead and always win. And it's not this deck, it's this core of cards, these specific ones that they are always tempo positive, or at the very least they were tempo neutral and they demanded a removal spell in the slot. And just to talk about the timeless version of this deck specifically, if you look at the remaining cards in the deck, they're all one mana removal spells or like busted ways to flip your Ajani and end the game quickly, though Chthonian Nightmare is more of a grindy piece. I love this card, though. It gets sideboarded out a lot. All right, I need to take a swig of water there. That was a lot of ramping. So in the past, right, if you look at like playable cards that are still fine, like Tarmogoyf is still playable and timeless if we do our filters right, but this card doesn't have the same advantage that, for example, Guide of Souls has. So we look at these, there's a difference between these two cards. Of course, Tarmogoyf is a nasty beater, but it costs 2 mana. So in your Swords to Plowshares, Lightning Bolt, Galvanic Discharge, whatever your removal spell of choice format is, the Tarmogoyf player is always going to fall a mana behind, and that's generally how threats were costed for most of Magic the Gathering's history. Like, sure, you can have a card that, oh, that's not a Primeval Titan, there you go. A big card that does a splashy ETB, but those cards were kind of costed around their ETB, and they costed a lot of mana. And if you got something that, you know, Baleful Strix, for example, that went ahead and gave you an effect. Oh, I don't own Baleful Strix, right? It's a mythic on Arena for some reason. Oh, it's only a rare. I should craft it. If you had a creature that drew you a card or something like that, the body on it would be pretty unimpressive. But here we have a Johnny who gets you the extra creature, and the body is very impressive. Let's talk about how impressive this card is and the sort of effect it has on a board state once it goes down. So if this Ajani hits the board and it's not answered, it essentially says cats you control are unblockable. Or if I'm losing and I choose not to attack, you don't want to attack me because I could just block with a cat and flip my Ajani and start using him as a repeatable removal spell every single turn. And what's really busted is the Luris interaction that he has. If you can get Luris and a Johnny onto the battlefield at the same time, your opponent is pretty much guaranteed to lose unless they have exile removal. Because if opponent shoots Luris, you flip a Johnny. If opponent shoots a Johnny, you just replay it with Luris, and you get a free 2/1 cat every single time you do that. So this card is just like incredibly warping. It just warps how the game plays as soon as it comes down. Like we said, it demands removal because it's a card like Ragavan that will get out of control given the opportunity. Same with Guided Souls, Ocelot, Pride, just a lot of the same. And the backside upside to this card is absolutely ridiculous. Bowmasters is a classic bit of design as well. That it's not one of the energy cards from MH3, sure, but it's a recent printing and it's sort of the same thing where the power level is very high. It is already 2 power, 2 toughness, flash for 2 mana, which obviously won't be playable in modern by itself. But, that's at least the base rate. It then does an ETB removal spell, and then it has a permanent hate bear effect forever. Imagine if they made like Thalia nowadays. Instead of a 2/1 first strike, it was a 2/2. It had flash, and when it entered the battlefield, it countered a spell unless your opponent paid an extra one. Like imagine if that was Thalia. That is essentially what Bowmasters is. It does the hate bear thing, and it has all the upside, all the juice, all the marbles. It can remove your opponent's thing that they were depending on with that 1 damage ping in a brainstorm format like this one that we're in right now, Timeless. It's crazy oppressive as well. And it's a stupid 1/1 that you don't want to have to use your removal spells on because you already used your removal spells on Ajani and friends. Let's talk about removal spells and how these cards have like warped the removal spells in the format. So nowadays everyone's playing Wrath of the Skies, which is what I was been telling people to play in order to kill this deck. This is a very efficient board wipe, sure, but there's been even an arms race in this format because of Wrath of the Skies. For example, this deck used to play Amulet, right? Unstable Amulet, which is a very fun card, by the way. I kind of miss playing with it. Unstable Amulet is really sweet, and it kind of has that same design as the two drops in this deck, where it's a two drop. It draws one card by itself, but then it just like keeps doing things after you already got the one card. So you're never gonna go card negative on it. You're always gonna get at least your one card. But even if you get no more energy for the rest of the game, you're gonna get random pings just by casting things off of Ragavan from exile or your other impulse draw effects in the deck. But if you do get energy, it just draws you cards, draw you cards, draws you cards. This is a really like sweet card for the deck. The only problem with it, well, there's two. The first problem on the face is that it's tempo negative, but that's fine because this deck does want one source of card advantage. It ended up being Chthonian Nightmare, not this in the current build. And the reason it is Chthonian Nightmare and not this is because of the card or app that the skies is it, guys. The way that this deck is rebuilding after a board wipe is they're just dumping their energy into unstable amulet. Why don't you blow up this stupid amulet? And that's what people ended up doing. So we have yet another Modern Horizons 3 card that has the same design trend where it's going to be neutral on card advantage no matter what, and then it's going to give you extra stuff after you've already spent your 2 mana and gotten your one card worth of value, which is, I mean, I've already talked about it a bunch. It's just a trend that we've seen with recent design. And now it comes to the obvious question of, oh, do I think these cards are design mistakes? And design mistake is a very strong word. Like the companion mechanic is a design mistake, sure. I think WotC like kind of hit the nail on the head because this is what they try to do with Modern Horizons sets, right? They're trying to make cards that are really just like on the cutting edge of playable in order to set packs, right? They're trying not to break formats in half like Nadu did. Nadu's a bit too much. But cards like this, it's really strong, but it's just forgivable enough where there's counterplay to it, and just hit it with a removal spell, idiot. It's just a two drop. But this raises the bar for two drops so dang high that it just feels ridiculous to play another creature in the format nowadays. It feels ridiculous to play Tarmogoyf when I showed you. It feels ridiculous to play Jarcel. This card used to be like an all-star before Modern Horizons 3 came out in Timeless. This is a very cool alchemy card if you're a paper boomer. Look at this cool card. It's does like a sort of Snapcaster Mage thing every turn. You start by casting one drop for 3, then a 2 drop, then a 3 drop, and it can cast anything, not just an instant or sorcery. So people would play this in like a Jund mid-range deck. They would go like Thoughtseize into Tarmogoyf into this. This would flash back the Thoughtseize, and if somebody removed the Tarmogoyf, it would flash that back. But in this format, it just can't compare to the new 2 drops. The new 2 drops that do something immediately. That even if the removal spell hits it immediately, you still get the 2/1. This Jarcel has to go to combat. It doesn't have to attack. It just has to go to the beginning of combat, which is pretty sweet. But this is just a 3 drop that dies to bolt. And somehow, the most busted card of them all, Oko Thief of Crowds, it's unplayable. This is an Oko format. And if you were to look at the meta tier list, actually, I just did my meta recommendation video for the upcoming qualifier and metagame challenge. Just like a quick breakdown of the meta and like what I think the top decks are and what I think you should practice if you're undecided. Not a single copy of Oko in any of those decks. Not a single copy of Oko. Could you believe that? The most notorious busted card. Banned in Standard, banned in Historic, banned in Pioneer, banned in Modern, banned in Legacy, in that order. Every single constructed format except Vintage. And it has a home in Vintage. This is playable in Oath of Druids in Vintage, plays multiple copies, and Bug Midrange plays this in Vintage too. Vintage is a cool format, just like Timeless. If you like Timeless content, you'll probably like Vintage content too. I watch it from time to time, even though I don't play, just because I think it's so cool. And like, this guy, he does nothing against this deck. What does Oko do when your opponent plays a Johnny Nakado Pariah? No, like really, like what's he supposed to do? Make a food? Cope? Cry? Your opponent put 3 power and 3 toughness into play for 2 mana. You could turn the Ajani into an Elk and prevent it from flipping, sure, but then you just give your opponent 5 power and Oko dies. Okay, sweet. I can make a food. Okay. Alright, let's imagine the play pattern, right? Guide of Souls, you use removal spell. Ajani, you use removal spell. Actually, let's say we're even on the play, right? Yeah, we're on the play, so we get to go first. We get to go first. We held up removal for Guide of Souls, and then turn 2, we held up removal spells for Ajani. Turn 3, we get to slam our Oko. You slam it on the battlefield. We slam that thing. We make a food. We go to 6 loyalty on the card. All my opponent has in play is a dorky cat. My opponent's gonna untap, play a Guided Souls, play their land drop. They got 2 more mana, play an Amp Raptor. Amp Raptor is gonna hit another threat, maybe a removal spell for the Oko, maybe Juggernaut Peddler, look at my hand, maybe Goblin Bombardment. It doesn't matter because at minimum, between the 2-1 from a Johnny, the Guide of Souls token, the Amped Raptor, my opponent has what, 5 power in play now against my Oko, which has 6 loyalty, which is like unkillably high, or at least it was when he was in Standard, Pioneer, Modern, or whatever. So my opponent already has 5 power and toughness, and that's like not even considering the Amped Raptor hit. And then we also gained energy for Guide of Souls from both Raptor ETBing, Raptor's ability, and whatever we hit off of Raptor in case it's a creature. So like if Raptor hits Bowmasters, for example, Bowmasters is going to enter the battlefield ping. It's going to gain us 2 energy from Guide of Souls, including the Raptor's ETB. We're going to have 3 energy, which means that we can fly the cat that was in play. That little dorky 2-1 is now a 4-3. And at that point, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ignore Oko and just attack my opponent. Because in that scenario, how much power and toughness did we have? We had 4 power on the cat, 2 more power on the Bowmasters for 6, 2 more power on the Raptor for 8, 9 power on board. And that's assuming that the Oko deck went first and had 2 removal spells for the turn 1 Guide of Souls, turn 2 Ajani. It's screwed up, man. That's just screwed up. That's too much. Oko got power crept somehow. That's wild. And I remember I saw Doomwake put out a video on like what cards could be unbanned in Modern, and one of the cards he mentioned was Oko. And people had varying reactions to that. And I immediately thought of Timeless, and I said, you know what? You can't play him in the energy meta of Timeless, and if energy is not getting banned in Modern, I don't think Oko should be unbanned in Modern. By the way, I'm not a Modern player, so it's really not my opinion to have. But this guy's got like some unhealthy play patterns. Just keep him banned. If the meta ever does slow down, like this guy is just bothersome. Keep him out of the meta. My God. And it's sort of another energy adjacent. We could almost call this a design mistake, a classic Modern Horizons card. No, not literally a design mistake, just to push Modern Horizons cards that they hit the nail on the head in terms of power level as Fleege. Of course, I'm playing Luris Nightmare. You can play non-Luris builds with Fleege. You cut the Nightmare, you cut the Luris, and then you would probably cut like your main deck Ragavans because you're slowing down the deck at that point, and then in the Nightmare Ragavan slot, you go ahead and put Fleeges, and then you can put like 1 or 2 copies of Fable, the Mirror Breaker, Ranger Captain, whatever your other 3 drops are going to be in the deck, right? Fleege, in my opinion, at least, heard other people say this, but Fleege is better than Uro because it immediately impacts the board state. Yeah, it does not draw you cards, sure, but it does its job. It slows down your opponent and gains you life. This card is single-handedly propping up control in the Timeless format, and keep in mind, just in case you forgot what Timeless is, Timeless is a Necropotence format. Dark Ritual. Timeless is a Dark Ritual into Necropotence format. And these cards are still good enough to see a lot of play. This card is propping up Jeskai control because Timeless is a weird dichotomy right now where you have to respect this wicked fast energy deck. You also have to respect the wicked fast combo decks. And then there's like the Demure tempo deck in between. Again, playing more busted Modern Horizons cards like Psychic Frog. That's trying to be 50% against the meta. But the point is, my original point is that Fleege is better than Uro. It is single-handedly propping up multiple top decks in the format right now. Energy has moved away from it lately, but it is propping up Jeskai control 110%. This is their win condition alongside the way that they stabilize, alongside late game card advantage. It's not card advantage since you draw cards, but you get a 6/6 from your graveyard multiple times in a format where you can fill your graveyard really easily with fetch lands. In Energy Mirrors, Fleege versions, if the game goes long, win every single time. In fact, Surgical Extraction for Fleege is a valid line of thinking if you are playing Energy against Fleege. I personally haven't been doing it lately. I've just been playing Juggernaut Peddlers as exile discard and trying to hit the Fleege that way. And if the game goes so long that my opponent's escaping Fleege multiple times, then I probably lost anyway on Energy. That's my personal line of thinking. But if we didn't have Juggernaut Peddler in this format, I could totally see Surgical on Flage to prevent that card from absolutely taking over games. And he just props up Jeskai control all by himself. He pitches to both the good pitch elementals. By the way, there's also a Fury format. Of all those good Modern Horizons design mistakes in the format by now. I love how we got them all at once. We got MH2 and MH3's best cards all just shoved into this format at once. It's been so fun to play and so fun to figure out, of course, but there's a lot of good stuff going on. All right, I took a water break to think. I got more topics. I wanted to just really quickly shout out the fact that they power crept Bolt. When I saw this being previewed, a lot of people were super, super high on this, saying that this is the new de facto removal spell. I wasn't totally sold because I didn't realize how good the other energy cards were necessarily going to be. But yeah, even by itself as a lightning bolt, quote unquote, that doesn't go face, that stores damage in the form of energy. Really sweet, really exceptional card that's gone to the top of the format. Again, this is another Modern Horizons banger where they really just they pushed it just as much as they could. It was clearly too good for Historic, which is why, by the way, in Historic, if you don't know the nerf there, it gives you only 2 energy instead of 3, so it's Shock instead of Lightning Bolt, which is interesting. This is another Modern Horizons classic where they push it right to the edge. They've gotten really good at that set design where they're really just pushing the horizons, kill me, of what is possible in Modern. And I want to just mention Amped Raptor again because we keep like thinking about it in this energy deck, but this has got to be somehow the most underexplored card of Modern Horizons, which is wild for me to say because people have played it everywhere at this point. But the fact that this card just casts something for your deck for free has stupid busted potential in aggro. Like, for example, let's say you're playing Gruul aggro or something like that. This just hits your Tarmogoyf. This hits a Burning Tree Emissary and gets you a 2/2 and 2 mana, and then you cast the Tarmogoyf from your hand. This hits Breakout, and you get to throw a hasty creature into play. Like, this card has become like the de facto new best 2-drop in like every format it's in. Like, compared to Burning Tree, which I just mentioned. 2 mana, 2/2, gives you 2 mana. Okay. 2 mana 2/2 is comparable to a 2/1 first strike. Sure, losing the toughness sucks, but getting first strike is pretty sweet. Let's go ahead and call those the same. Amped Raptor doesn't have that funny double mana cost, and it does something really cool by not just giving you 2 mana, but by giving you the dang card to spend it on as well. And it can hit bigger too. It could give you 3 or 4 mana if you have 3 and 4 drops in your deck. And just yeah, another timeless classic for if you guys don't know. This is a beam deck that was pointed out to me the other day. This is your brain on Amped Raptor. So imagine this. This is a combo deck that wins turn 4 if it doesn't get counterspelled or discarded. And if you get lucky and draw your Seek New Knowledges, you could actually win on turn 3. So Alchemy card. Seek New Knowledge. Seek 2 cards. Put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library. Seek just means that you get a random card from your library that meets the criteria. Wow, would you look at that? We don't have very many non-land cards. So imagine your opening hand is 1 Seek. 1 Seek and 6 lands. That's what you're supposed to mulligan to. You have 1 Seek in your opener. You cast Seek. You draw 2 Seeks. Or perhaps you draw a Seek and an Amped Raptor. Either way, if you draw Amped Raptor or Oracle, you put it on the bottom of your library and you keep the Seek. Or if you draw 2 Seeks, you just put a land on the bottom of your library. Okay, so turn 2, we cast a Seek. Turn 3, we're going to cast another Seek. So we now have 3 non-land cards in our hand at this point. And then on turn 4, we can cast another Seek. At this point, we have been able to pull every non-land card out of our deck because we only have 6 non-land cards on our deck. With Seek, you put Thassa's Oracle on the bottom of your deck, and then you cast Amped Raptor. Let's read the ability very carefully. Exile cards from the top of your library until you exile an on-land card. All right, so here's your deck. All of these lands on top and Thassa's Oracle on the bottom. Cast Thassa's Oracle for free with the 2 mana. You guys want to play it right now? No, this wins turn 4, guaranteed. No pilot skill. Literally. No pilot skill involved. It's just, do you get counterspelled or discarded? Um, and that's why I say Amped Raptor somehow, even though it's on everybody's radar as the best card, is still like the most unexplored card in the set because how this thing is templated makes the effect as good as possible. And it can do some really goofy things. This deck is just a prime example. Really, really fun. By the way, uncommon, one rare that you probably already have an uncommon. So go ahead and craft this and try it in timeless once. It's so silly. It's a blast. But by the way, have you guys ever thought about Ocelot Pride? I kind of spent a lot of time gesticulating at all of the other energy cards, but you ever thought about like how good they made this card? Like they sought to make a Ragavan for each color, and they succeeded at making the white Ragavan. This card is about as good as you could make it. They could have made it just a 1/1 life link when you gain life, make a 1/1 on your end step. Or they could have made it, oh, when it deals combat damage to a player, make a 1/1. But instead of making it when it deals combat damage, they made it any life gain trigger works it. And then they added that City's Blessing thing where you get 2/1/1s. But in fact, the City's Blessing thing copies all tokens. So, pop quiz, what happens when you copy one with Fable of the Mirror Breaker? It's a very goofy interaction. I happened to me only once did I actually get to Fable the Mirrorburger targeting Ocelot Pride, and my opponent just conceded in response to my first activation. Even though I was behind on board, it just snowballs so rapidly, so quickly, because these things work exponentially with each other. They work exponentially with each other, by the way. If you have City's Blessing, the first is making 2 tokens, the next one is making 6 tokens, the one after that I think it makes 16. I can't remember the math off the top of my head. And then it's doubling up any other token, doubles up the Sajani token, doubles up your treasure tokens, doubles up your food tokens if you're going to play the Cursed Bant Oko Ocelot Pride deck. And what spooks me is that this sort of card design is the kind of thing that got Ragavan banned in Legacy. Now, I'm not a Legacy player, but I've seen some Legacy deck lists. I've seen people playing these two little hooligans backed up by Days. Kind of scary. It's kind of screwed up. If you guys aren't aware of the impact Days has on a format, think about it this way. We talked about our scenario before. I play Ragavan, you swords it. Imagine if something else happened. I play Ragavan, you swords it. No, you don't. I lose a land drop, but what I do have is Ragavan. And Ragavan is going to be making me a treasure every single turn to make up for that land drop. And on subsequent turns, I can just keep bouncing my island. I don't care. I have a Ragavan in play. He's getting the card advantage. I'm pulling cards out of your deck. I stole your Ponder, your Brainstorm. It doesn't matter the color of the card I take because I'm making a treasure token off of my Ragavan. And now we got the same thing. Like, sure, this doesn't have like the immediate like mana ramp plus card advantage impact that Ragavan has, but it's super interesting to see these. Oh, and by the way, we haven't even talked about Mockingbird and how like Mockingbird copies all of these very, very well. This is such a cool card. This card has not made the cut in Timeless, right? It was very fun. The reason, I think the main reason why it didn't quite make the cut in Timeless at least, or at least Timeless Energy, is just because the energy deck is very well tuned in Mardu. Having access to Juggernaut, Peddler, or Orcish Bowmasters really like rounds out the deck against the format. You can't really splash a fourth color here. Jeskai does bring you some things. Like I was thinking about, okay, we can cut black, play counter spells, play Lavinia, but it didn't quite get there. But this card copies every energy creature successfully very well. It enters the battlefield as a copy. So if you copy Amped Raptor, you get to do the Amped Raptor thing, and then you just have an Amped Raptor with flying. If you copy Orcish Bowmasters, you get your ping and your 1/1. If you copy a Johnny, you get to flip it to the Legend roll. You copy the Guidosouls, have 2 Guidosouls that are going to bounce off of each other and just keep gaining you a bunch of life. If you get another Ocelot Pride token, it's going to go exponentially once you gain your life. Can't copy Ragavan, not well at least. But if you want to suicide your first Ragavan, then yes, you can get a flying Ragavan out of your Mockingbird. Also, just one more thing that I want to mention about Ajani before I hang it up, because we're at the point where my rambles have been quite disheveled, and when I stop talking, I'm going to think about if I have another topic, and I think the answer is no. But The fact that the legend rule is something you're encouraged to do with this guy feels like an anti-gaming pattern. If you guys know the term anti-gaming, it's the idea that a video game is encouraging you to do something illogical that you really shouldn't be doing if you're trying to win in like a realistic view of the world perspective. For example, a common anti-gaming pattern if you're playing like a single player video game where you lose a lot of hit points and you're at like 10 out of 100 health, instead of using a healing item, you could just jump off a cliff and respawn and you'll respawn at 100 out of 100 health. That's a classic anti-gaming pattern. You're encouraging the player to jump off a cliff even though in real life they would want to use the healing item. Uh, Now we're being encouraged to abuse the legend rule and put two Ajani's into play so that Ajani can see an alternate reality version of himself blink out of existence and say, oh no, it's so traumatic. Where did that alternate version reality version of myself come from? And it's so traumatic it ignites his planeswalker spark and he lore wise planeswalks for the first time in his life and he becomes pissed off at Johnny and wins the game. That's a weird pattern. And I don't know if that was intentional design or what, but it feels super weird to have a legend like this that I'm actively encouraged to clone it. I'm actively encouraged to draw multiple copies of it. I'm actively encouraged to legend rule it. It's just kind of strange. I want to do that funny little bit there. All right, conclusion. All of these cards are pushed as fuck. They're all tempo positive, at least, and they all have the shared property where they are dangerous when they stay in play, except for Amped Raptor, which we pointed out is like the most crazy efficient 2-for-1 ever printed, where you can often get more than two mana worth of value out of it. But if you look at all of these cards, these are cards that either they cost one mana or they have an impact on the board and they provide some sort of value just the longer that they stay in play. And we don't need to read the text on the cards again. These are format staples, and the reason they are is because you always win when you play them. You always get ahead on board state, or you always at least get parity in terms of mana and board state. But when you're on the beatdown and you're forcing your opponent to always have the answer, you have enough redundancy in your deck to eventually pull ahead, and you're slowing down their game plan. I guess that's one more thing I didn't say too explicitly in this video that we can go ahead and talk about really quick. Sort of the opportunity cost of using removal. So, like, let's say you're up against the Psychic Frog deck, you're up against Blue Black Tempo, and your opponent has like their very cool Psychic Frog in play. Hey, Arena, can I search? No? Okay, thank you. Trying to talk out here. So let's say your opponent has the opportunity to perhaps play a Psychic Frog, which I can't find. There he is. Right? Let's say they're holding both Psychic Frog and Swords to Plowshares in their hand. And then you play a card that demands removal. And it's their turn too. They have two mana. So they have the choice. Do they play the Psychic Frog or do they play the Swords to Plowshares? And when you're playing against cards like Ragavan, or perhaps playing against a Johnny, where you know your opponent can play Goblin Bombardment and flip it if you tap out for the Psychic Frog, you're inclined to just use the Swords to Plowshares or hold up a removal spell instead of tapping out to play your 2 mana sorcery speed play. And that's how this deck gets even further ahead without even trying. The threat of these cards doing things as they stay in play and demanding removal spells delays your own opponent's game plan. And it just steals wins. All right, I think that's going to be it for me. I wanted to just kind of yap without a filter and see if people like this style of video. So that was it for me. Let me know if you like this. If you thought it was cool, I could do these from time to time. One more thing for me on the channel. Sorry for the lack of gameplay videos for like a couple days, maybe getting close to a week now. I've just been playing Timeless every single day since Modern Horizons came out, multiple hours a day. I was just starting to get a little tired of it. So that's why we did a variety of things instead. Not a video every day, sadly. Oh, and I kept up a video every day from when I made the channel around when Modern Horizons 3 came out until now, which was awesome. But I did a couple of more high effort things. I did a tutorial on surgical extraction. I did like a meta breakdown, and then I did this sort of podcasty stream of thought style video. So if either of those three things are something that people like, I could do it again. I know definitely people like the surgical tutorial, and with the meta breakdown video, people ask me to do those, on a somewhat frequent cadence, like once a set release or something like that. And I do think that's a pretty good idea. That's it for me. Gameplay will come back to the channel I don't want to promise tomorrow, the day after this video goes live, because that implies I record and edit right away. But I'm at the point where I have not played a single game of Magic the Gathering in a couple of days, and now I really want to play. I don't feel bored or burned out at all. It was just, starting to get a little tiring. And also, like, the meta is nice and settled in Timeless now. Like, the innovation was definitely slowing down, and it was that combination of innovation slowing down plus I'd just been playing so much where I felt like I was starting to get tired of it. And I didn't want to burn out or anything, so we cooled it with the gameplay for a little bit. But like next week and a half, the metagame challenge is yeah, next weekend, like 10 days from now as I record this. So we'll just play some meta decks. We'll essentially play them as tutorials for people to learn from the gameplay. We'll play a lot of energy because that's what I'm planning on bringing to the metagame challenge. Then we'll, of course, play the metagame challenge. Then after that, we'll have fun fucking around and brewing up cool new things in Timeless. I'll try to play some things that are really off the wall. If you want to like get cooking in Discord, get your ass in my Discord if you're not there. Because if you post a cool deck in there, I like 100% see it and want to play it and copy it. You don't even have to ask me to do it. You just have to post it. And if it's cool enough, I'm definitely going to give it a try. All right, that's it for me, folks. Thanks for watching.